Before we dive into today's episode with Enneagram Ashton, I want to give you a quick intro to the Enneagram, especially if you've heard the term floating around but aren't exactly sure what it means. The Enneagram is a personality framework made up of 9 core types, each reflecting a different way of seeing and responding to the world. What makes it powerful is that it goes deeper than surface level traits. It's really about motivation, the why behind what we do, not just the what. Now, we're not going deep into all 9 types in this episode, but we've listed them for you in the show notes so you can reference them as you listen. My chat with Ashton gives a great foundation for the kind of insight the Enneagram offers. She does an amazing job showing you how this tool can impact not only your personal growth, but also how you show up in your work, your relationships, and everyday decision making. So whether you're brand new to the Enneagram or you've already typed every one of your clients, you're in for a treat. Let's get into it. Hello, y'all, and welcome back to Business First Creatives. Today, I am having a conversation with Enneagram Ashton, and I think it's so funny to call her that. But back in episode 60, you guys will remember that I interviewed my client, Caitlin Deacle, because both of us had recently gotten absolutely obsessed with Enneagrams, and I have not talked about it on the podcast again since. So today, I am talking to Ashton, and we are just going to talk about everything Enneagram and whatever comes to mind. I'm so excited to have her on the show. Ashton, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited to be part of your community and just happy to be here.
Yes. Okay. So, guys, Ashton actually has a background very similar to mine, and we did not talk about this before I hit record. So, we're going to get into it now. Ashton, I want you to tell the listening audience what you used to do before Enneagrams and how you shifted into the work that you currently do.
Oh, we did not talk about this prior. So I have my bachelor's and master's degree in psychology, and I've always kind of worked in the helping field, but specifically I was working in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault prevention. So I would work with our state organization and the different centers and programs around the state in order to make sure that they had effective prevention programs that they were developing and helping them to evaluate those programs.
And you are also, well, I was going to say a former professor like me, but you're not actually, because do you still teach?
I am still teaching, yes. So I took a break this semester, which was very needed and helpful, but I do teach in the field of human services at a local college around here. And really what human services is like services, helping people provide services to humans. Like that's the simplest way to put it. And so I teach courses around how to help other people, which is like so funny if you know my Enneagram type, and victim advocacy courses. And I teach intro to human services and just things like that.
It's so funny, y'all. So I have been following everything related to Ashton on Instagram since meeting her at the Creative Educators Conference. And one thing that I realized is that she actually lives where I went to high school. And so it's funny that I saw that you were a professor because, I mean, decades ago. Now, you and I have already talked about how old I am, but decades ago, I got like one of my first starts as a college professor was at Hack.
Oh my gosh.
So yes. And so, I mean, it kind of brought back some memories. So we are going to shift gears into talking about Enneagrams. And I feel like I want you to give an introduction of what Enneagrams are and why you find them important to like self-discovery.
Yeah. So the Enneagram is an ancient typing system. And Coley and I talked before about how a lot of people like to classify the Enneagram as a personality test. And I'm sure that I will give you my thoughts on tests. And there are tests, right? But what really is a typing system, meaning that it separates people into 9 different types. I don't really like the word separate because like we are all as human beings connected in some sort of way, but I should say it classifies us into specific types where it is related to our motivation. So our biggest fears and our biggest desires. I'm sure that a lot of you have heard about personality systems like Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders or DISC assessment. And I use those too. Like I not obviously, I'm not trained in them like I am in the Enneagram, but those tools do a really great job at focusing in on behaviors of people. So maybe somebody is extroverted or introverted. They don't shy away from conflict, or they might avoid it like the plague, right? So those are behaviors. What the Enneagram is focused in on is your motivation behind those behaviors. So why you approach conflict head on, why you avoid it, why you're extroverted. So it's really getting to the point of the why behind those behaviors. That's why the Enneagram can be so impactful, because it can explain some of those behaviors that might be really confusing to us in ourselves and in other people. And so once we understand why people are doing things the way that they are, we can understand them better. We can approach them with more empathy and understanding, and just really truly get to know them as a whole instead of just what we're seeing on the outside.
So when it comes to Enneagrams, it was a little weird because again, I had never taken an Enneagram test, and we are totally going to talk about the tests and why they're useful and why they're not useful. But it wasn't until someone, like, I don't know, it was maybe like the 20th time that someone asked me, "Well, what's your Enneagram?" I was like, "Well, damn it, let me go take this test real fast so I can tell you what it is." And I took it. And I will admit, I was completely confused as to what to do with it, because I've already told Ashton I'm an 8, which you guys may remember from episode 60, but I'm an 8, and I'm only an 8 by 2 points. I'm a 1 and a 3 right under there. And so I didn't understand how you take that information and, like, to not be silly, but just pick one. Like, it told me that 8 was my highest. And so, okay, is the test just 100% accurate? And as I started to, like, read the results, I was like, oh, like, I can see a lot of situations where I'm an 8, but I can also see a lot of situations where I change to a 3, and then maybe where a 1 comes out a little bit more. But then I'm going to admit my second mistake, and then I'm going to start asking Ashton a few questions. But my second mistake was, of course, one that you've identified over and over again, is when someone asks you what your wing is. I was one of those dumb people that kept saying over and over again, "Oh, I'm an 8 wing 3."
Ah!
Because the 3 was the second highest number. Again, like, no one really told me how to
Mhm.
interpret the results, what they would mean. But the reason that I got fascinated after I took the results was I was having a conversation with one of my clients, and all of a sudden I realized, wait, is this related to why people hire me to help them with their systems? And then I started sending out emails, and I was like, hey, people on my email list, can you just tell me what your Enneagram is if you know it? Just click one. Tell me what it is. And then I started posting on Instagram. I was like, hey, tell me below what your Enneagram is. And then when some of my clients didn't respond, I just flat out started emailing them or texting them directly. I'm like, no, I need data. Like, I'm really trying to figure this out. Can you just tell me what your Enneagram was? And several of them were like, well, I've never done it. Let me go take the test and get back to you. So once I explored this in this way, and again, we're going to talk about tests, but once people started getting me their information back, I started to see trends, not in who was hiring me, but in how, like, the service went. And so then I was even, like, more fascinated with, well, what if there was a way that I could help people in a way that was better for them just by knowing what their Enneagram type was? And so that's like the rabbit hole that I started to go down.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that's exactly why I'm obsessed with it, is because like the question is, or the answer to the question is that yes, there is a way for that to be. And I just loved that you kind of polled and evaluated your audience, because like it's so, I like love data. So it's just so fascinating to me to see who are the types that will work with us. And that's really why it can be so impactful to people, to entrepreneurs, to relationships, to businesses, etc.
And it was really interesting because I was listening to you on another episode to prepare for our conversation. And you said something that I thought was absolutely fascinating, because you said a lot of entrepreneurs identify either through self identification or from a test as a 3, and that's not always, like, the most accurate. It tends to be, what our desires are, instead of, like, I'm saying this backwards, but we tend to identify as threes just because we're entrepreneurs. And when I heard you say that, I went back to like my list when people had started giving me, and I barely had any threes. But the people who were threes, oh, I knew they were threes even before I asked them what their type was. So I just thought that that was like super interesting based on what you said, and that a lot of people in my audience didn't actually identify as threes.
Yeah. And it's because a lot of the three, the three is called the achiever. And so a lot of the three behaviors are characteristics that as entrepreneurs, like we have to have. We have to be driven. We have to be a self starter. We have to be confident, like all of those things. But it comes back to those motivations and what actually drives those behaviors.
So we're going to let you rant now, Ashton, and you are allowed to rant. You are allowed to cuss. You are allowed to do whatever you'd like, because Ashton has some pretty opinionated views on people taking tests. So, I mean, that's how I got started. And I will admit, before I found you, I didn't actually know that there were people like you that would help people like dive deeper beyond the results that you get from a test. So tell me what the test is good for and what it's not good for.
So it's very normal to want to take a test, right? Like right off the bat, we're humans and we want other people to tell us who we are. Like we don't want to have to do the deep inner work. But like I said, we're humans. And so sometimes we answer questions in ways we want other people to perceive us versus who we actually are at the core, right? So tests are a great place to start. There are going to be some that are better than others. So I will give you some tests for you to put in the show notes. So specifically, tests that I am okay with people taking are the Truity test and the RETI, which is actually RHETI, the Riso Hudson Enneagram Typing Instrument. It's a mouthful. The reason I enjoy those tests is because it gives you a probability, kind of like you said. I'm willing to bet you took one of those. Is that
I
right?
did. I took the ready. And
Okay.
actually, I believe that I took the other one that you mentioned before I recorded my last episode,
Okay.
but I didn't get the results of that one, at least that I could find this morning while I was looking for
Okay.
my PDFs.
So that one, the Truity gives you results in a pie chart format, and then the Ready gives you kind of like scores. And
Mhm.
so the reason I recommend those two is because, like I said, it gives you the probability. And so you can take those results then and do the work. Like what I have an issue with is when tests will just say, like, you are a 7 or you are a 2, and then people just run on their merry way and don't do any work and they're just like, "Oh, I'm a 7," or like, I'm and they actually aren't. The tests are really only about 60% accurate, and like I said,
Woo!
it's because of life experiences. So, maybe in that moment, you were answering questions based on how you were feeling or what you were experiencing in that moment, like I said before, answering based on how we want to be perceived, which is very normal. Like, that's a normal thing to do. Like, oh, I'm a kind person. Sure, I'll answer this question that's really trying to align with being an Enneagram too. Um, also, in speaking of that, in general, women will score high for 2 just because we're taught, like society kind of teaches us that we have to be kind, compassionate, and like giving somebody the shirt off our back, etc. So there's just so many different things that come into play, like what's our trauma response? How are we when we're stressed? Like so many things that come into play when it comes to the test that makes it difficult. What happens then is, say you take the test and you have that you score high for an 8 to 3 and a 1, then I would take that information and help you decipher the differences between the three. Or a lot of people do that on their own and read books or dive deeper into that. But I'm not surprised at all that you scored high for all three of those, because they have a lot of shared behavior characteristics. It just comes down to the motivations that are different. But if somebody scores high for an 8, they typically score high for a 3 and a
Mhm.
1 as well.
Which, I mean, you don't understand that when you get the results. Like, it's not describing to you that, hey, these two have a lot of characteristics. And so this is why we would expect that you score high on these three. And I honestly feel a little bad for people who just take the test and they get the result and they don't actually like pay for additional information or whatever it is. Because one of the things that I didn't really like read in depth until much later was the different character, like the rest of how it was describing me. Because now that I've had like a pretty bad year last year, an 8 going to a 5 actually makes so much sense for me now, because when I do get very stressed out, I am extremely avoidant, which I now talk to my therapist about on like a weekly basis. But it makes so much more sense now that I am reading this, because it helps me see that, this behavior didn't just pop up all of a sudden, because I have spent the better part of last year thinking that some of the ways that I'm changing are like, oh no, it's this situation. And it's like, well, no, this has pretty much always been here based on my motivations and my desires. And so now I'm even more motivated to kind of look into those things to help me. I mean, I don't want to say be a better person. That kind of sounds like foo foo. But I do think that it helps me to navigate the world perhaps in a different way now that I am reading about my types and my strengths and what happens in stress and when I need security and like all of these kinds of things.
Well, that's why I like to explain the Enneagram sometimes as like a road map, or as a GPS. People don't use GPS anymore, but you know what I mean? Like it's your Google Maps, your Apple Maps, because it can tell you that when you're going the wrong way, you know how they yell at you if you have the noise on, which I do
Mm-hmm.
not, but some people might, it tells you that you're going a wrong way, and then it says rerouting, right? And so having the knowledge of the Enneagram is helping you to reroute. If you're going down a path that is going to kind of trigger some of that stress response, then you know what you need to do in order to get back on the right path.
So, talk to me a little bit about healthy levels and unhealthy levels, because this is yet another layer of the Enneagram. And I think that if people don't kind of dive into it deep enough, they miss these parts, where it's helping you get back on the path or recognize when you are perhaps being unhealthy and getting back to a healthy level.
Yeah, so I actually hate the words. Like I think it's so cheesy, like healthy, a healthy version of you or unhealthy. But
What words do you prefer?
I
Tell
mean,
me
that's what
that.
I use because
Oh, okay.
that's what it is. But I think that it's cheesy and people stare at me, like I am a third eyeball sometimes when I'm like, this is the healthy version of the type. But what that means is like you are aware. Like healthy kind of is a direct connection to being self-aware. You're aware of your tendencies. And so therefore you have behaviors that are going to kind of depict the healthiest version of you or the best version of you. When you are unhealthy, you're kind of living in this state of being unaware where you're just, having these reactions and you don't know really how to get back into a healthy version of you. So, like, for example, I'm going to use you as an example. Sorry. The
No
healthy
worries.
8 is, first of all, going to take on characteristics of the 2. And so they're going to be aware that sometimes their desire for control and power might get in the way, right? So that's part of
Mhm.
it. And then from there, the behaviors are going to reflect using that power for good. So being altruistic and helpful and really using their voice to help people who don't have a voice. Being able to be direct and decisive and a great leader. So they're using that power for good. When 8s are really, really unhealthy, they're going to use that power for bad, right? Like it's kind of the opposite. And so they might be a bully or demeaning of other people. They might want to take control and kind of steamroll over others' thoughts, opinions,
Mm.
beliefs. They might, just kind of be more of a dictator instead of being a healthy leader.
Yeah.
So, really, where a lot of people fall is the middle, which is the average, right? And so, some of those common stereotypes that you might see on Instagram, on the internet that have to do with the Enneagram are really centered around that average level.
And so, what are some of the average levels that you would see for like an 8 versus the average levels that we would see for a 2 like you?
Yeah. So average for 8 is going to be kind of a mix of both. Like you still want to have like, the 8's biggest fear is being seen as weak or powerless or controlled, right? So you still are going to have that fear, but you might be decisive. Like you're still going to be decisive and direct, but you might be sharp with your tone, right?
Okay.
You might resist vulnerability because you want to be perceived as
Strong.
strong. And a lot of times, 8's are going to equate vulnerability with weakness. You're still going to like have great leadership qualities, but are you using those leadership qualities to benefit yourself or benefit other people? Whereas for a 2, so the two's biggest fear is being unloved or not wanted, not needed, not liked, whereas like 8's don't really care about that. And it's kind of like this is the point of the Enneagram, right? Like for my sister's an 8. And so for our relationship growing up, we were vastly different humans, right? And so, she would look at me and be like, "Why do you care so much?" And I'm like, "How do you not care?" Like, just the Enneagram brings that level of understanding that, we're humans, and it's natural for us to just think that everybody thinks the way that we do. And then we have this language and we're like, oh, wait a second. Like, you don't think that way? But for twos are the helper, but where they can get in trouble is like helping to receive something in return. And so there might be tendencies of that for the average two. But, even though really healthy twos are also kind and caring, like average twos are also kind and caring. It's just, they might have to have a heart check sometimes, which is how I describe it in the why behind the helping or the why behind like why they have that caring personality.
So for a 2, for example, and I'm trying, again, like I'm fascinated, but I don't quite feel like I always get it because it's funny. We didn't discuss what I was a professor of, statistics and math. So I
Oh,
love the data,
yeah.
and
Which
I
makes
kind of
sense to me since you were collecting the data of your
yes,
community.
but not so great at the interpretation. So this is when I'm like leaning into what I see is definitely not a strength of mine.
Mhm.
But like, so does that mean that like for a 2, an unhealthy helper would be helping people to the detriment of themselves? Like,
Yes.
okay, just making sure
100%.
that I was okay.
Mhm. To the level of burnout and then resentment. Like, they're like, "Oh, well, I'm done doing these things for you because you're not doing anything for me."
Yes. Okay. So I feel like this is kind of a good opportunity to say, people take the test, they find out what the probabilities are of their types. And then what does it look like to have someone else help you to really look at those results and find your type and your wing and kind of help you figure out how that should be interpreted in how you are navigating your world, your business, your friendships? Like, how is it that you work with people in order to help them with that discovery?
Yeah. So, there are just so many components to the Enneagram. Like, it's a complex tool, and it's not a tool that is, like, gonna make you feel great all of the time. So sometimes it's hard for us to admit that these things are like our reality, right? And so having someone alongside of you kind of going through that Enneagram journey with you can be really helpful because it's an outside perspective, and sometimes we need an outsider to be able to get real and honest with us and to help us kind of pave that path, so to speak. But like I said, the Enneagram is complex, meaning that you don't just have your one type. Your motivations are going to stay with your one type, but you also have your wings. You have where you go when you're stressed, where you go when you're the healthiest version of you, and, so many other components about that. And so that's what the test doesn't tell you. A lot of times too, I was working with this one person who came to me really not for me to help her figure out her type. She came to me for like the next step. Okay, now I know my type, and how do I become the best version of myself? But what we realized in working together was that she actually thought that she was an 8. And in reality, she was a 2 who was just really stressed out, because the
Mm,
2, when they're stressed, looks like an 8.
okay.
And so those kinds of things are not uncommon for me to discover in other people. And, there's just so much that goes into it.
Okay, so I'm honestly laughing a little bit because, and if you're watching YouTube, maybe you saw me laughing at her. When you said, an outside perspective, the thing that came to mind the most is my husband and our therapist. He thinks he really appreciates it. Was really funny. I asked him how long he thought we would be in therapy. He's like, "Oh, I think we're going to be in therapy forever." He really enjoys having an outside perspective to kind of mediate between us, because my husband and I are very similar, but we are also very different. And this reminds me that I didn't look it up before I got on the call with you. But when I got really fascinated, I made him go take the test so he could come back and tell me what his Enneagram was. And unfortunately, I do not remember what it was. But is that part of like how someone can use their Enneagram? I don't want to say for good, but like, because I mean, this is a business podcast. Don't get me wrong. I'm fascinated with everything to help me be a better business owner, to help the people that I am working with in a more sustainable way, but also personal relationships. Like, how is it that you may coach somebody, or how is it that someone may use their Enneagram to have healthier relationships with their partners, their children, their friendships?
Well, when we know more, we understand more, So when we are knowing what's motivating them, we can adjust our behaviors to kind of fit in line with that. And that goes both ways, right? Like, I'm not saying like, oh, this is, how they are. And so you have to change who you are, but it gives you a level of understanding. So the easiest thing for me to talk about is, we just moved, which is like 10 out of 10 do not recommend doing with a 4 and a 2-year-old. Chaos doesn't even begin to describe it. But I am a 2, and my husband is a 6, and he is very much a plan and prepare for the worst, and then whatever happens, like, it's going to be good because I've planned it for the worst things. Whereas I'm very much like oh, I don't plan. I just fly by the seat of my pants and hope everything works out. And I know that it'll work out. And so, like these two this situation, we just, worked through that so differently based on our personality. But I knew this about him. And so I knew that I needed to kind of, make sure that he felt prepared, make sure that he, had what he needed, and he knew that like I might have needed a little bit of extra support when it came to the planning, because I'm just like trying to take care of everybody else.
Yeah. So, on average, how long do you typically work with people to explore their Enneagram?
It's so hard to answer because it's so dependent on the person. Sometimes it's, one session and it's so obvious to all parties involved. And then other times, like it is a process. And sometimes we have to work backwards and look at childhood and, explore coping mechanisms and trauma responses and stress responses, all of those things to kind of get to your main motivation, because it is like uncovering levels or layers of an onion, right? You're like peeling back those layers of, okay, well, I did this, but why did I do this? And, I responded in this way or I reacted in this way, but why did I do that? So sometimes it takes a process. A lot of times we figure out their type and then it's like, okay, now what do I do with this information? And how do I become a better version of myself? How do I communicate better? How do I, reduce my stress response? Things like that.
Okay, so I did find my husband's results. And
Oh,
actually, this is why I was so confused. I know you're like, ooh, tell me.
tell me.
So the funny thing is, when you asked me which test I took, and I was like, well, I took Ready, but I also think I took Truity, which I didn't. That's the test that he took, now that I'm
Okay.
looking at his results, which is why I couldn't remember what mine was. But he's a peacemaker, he's a 9.
Yeah, that's very opposite of an 8.
And I mean, he's a 9 by a lot,
Yeah.
at least according to the,
Yeah.
probabilities, percentages that it gave.
But I will say I see a lot of 8 and 9 partnerships because they balance each other out so well. Because, 8s can be a little bit headstrong and 9s are very much like go with the flow. Whatever
Mhm.
happens, happens. I can view multiple perspectives and see different opinions and like, oh, I can see why they did it that way. And the 8s are like, no, they shouldn't have done it that way. Like
You make me sound so headstrong, Ashton.
I don't think you're denying it.
I'm not. I'm not at all. I mean, now I do want to kind of take a small pivot to the wings because I admitted to you my mistake that I just thought that it was the second highest type. But what additional insights does your wing give you for yourself?
So the wings are the numbers on either side of your main type. So, like we said, as an 8, your wing would either be a 7 or a 9. And so, what that looks like is your motivations are still going to stay with your main type, but you might take on some behavior characteristics of your wing. So, I'm willing to bet that you have a 7 wing. Is that right?
Yes. So the funny thing is, I didn't know you, Ashton. I didn't have you. So in true Coley fashion, do you know how I picked my wing? I asked ChatGPT. And I'm being funny, and I'm not saying that it told me I was a 7 and that was the end of it. It just more told me the characteristics, and it's like, reading over this, do you feel stronger one way or the other? And I just thought that that was like an awesome perspective because I was like, okay, no, I really do feel like I'm a 7, and I'm like, can you tell me more? And then they told me more, and I was like, okay, no, I'm definitely a wing 7.
Yeah. And like I said, most 8s I feel like that I work with are wing 7 because the 9 is such like a contrast to the 8, but it's more of like a gentle strength, I would say. Whereas 8s with a 7 wing are more of like an optimistic strength. So it really just it paints more of a picture of who you are and why you do things the way that you do and more of like your personality. And it's why you can look at 2 different 8s and see that they're not identical. There's still like a lot of components about them that are different. They're viewing the world kind of in a similar way or have a similar foundation, but there's still just different pieces of each individual person. It's why it drives me a little crazy when people say, like, well, I don't want to be labeled or I don't want to be put in the box or there aren't just, 9 different types of people in the world. And I'm like, well, of course there aren't, but this plays a role into who you are. And wouldn't you want to use that to better understand yourself and others?
I mean, I think it was really interesting in the beginning of our conversation where you talked about it classifying you and not really putting you in this box that's very rigid that you can't get out of. I kind of interpreted the wings as being like a spectrum. Yes, 8 is your main type. We can identify and recognize a lot of the strengths and the weaknesses of an 8 inside yourself, but the wings are what kind of guide you into the other parts of yourself and your personality that don't really fit into the 8s, but that you demonstrate a lot inside of your personal and business life.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And the wings can fluctuate. So some people might think that they're, accessing more of one wing when they're, working and more of the other wing when they're at home, etc.
That is fascinating. One of the things that I was trying to explore, I guess, when I first got the results of my test, and I was like, okay, it said that just because an 8 was my highest score doesn't mean that I'm an 8. And I started thinking, well, what if I'm an 8 when it's like my business? And what if I'm a 3 in everything else? Because I feel like in school and maybe in my personal life, I do tend to lean more towards a 3, but in my business, I'm 100% an 8 is my personality. How is it possible, or is this a thing where your actual main type will fluctuate as well? Or is it just your wings that fluctuate?
Just your wings. So your
Okay.
main type has been with you since you were born. Like it's more of a nature versus nurture situation, so to
Okay.
speak. And so that's why you should be able to look back on your life and see kind of how your type showed up in those experiences versus like your life experiences dictating what your type is. So your main type will stay the same, but I'm willing to bet. So if you were to, not to turn this into you right now, but if you were to tell me the things that you relate to about the three, which do you have any off the top of your head?
I have my piece of paper. So one of the things that a three wants to be seen as valuable and worthwhile. And I tend to feel that way when it comes to the end result that I'm giving my clients. Like, I don't necessarily think it's that I want to be viewed as valuable and worthwhile, but I want my advice and I want the end result that I gave you to be viewed as valuable and worthwhile.
So why? Like, is that because you want to be seen that way? Or is that because you want to avoid being seen as weak?
It's interesting. I'm not sure that it's about me, which sounds not like an eight. I feel like it's more about them. I want them to kind of feel like they got their money's worth. I want them to take the thing that I told them that they needed and actually put it into practice. Well, because that means I was right. So maybe that's the, I
So
like to be right.
the eight's biggest desire is to protect themselves and other people. So they care very deeply about their people and making sure that they have what they need. And that's what that sounds like to me.
And
So
that's
again,
why
on
I'm
the
an eight.
surface, you would think like, oh, that's a very three trait. But then when you like get down to the why, it's, oh, this connects to the eight.
The other thing that I saw in the three for the test results was that threes don't like anything that looks like failure. And I feel like I'm always repurposing or changing a failure and making sure that it's seen as what I did right versus the
Mhm.
things that I did wrong. So
Yeah.
again, is that like an eight?
Yeah, to make that focus on, again, like, where you're protecting yourself. And, a lot of eights will say too that I'm like trying not to upset the eights on here, but a lot of eights will say that they don't care what people think, but a lot of them do. They just pretend that they don't. It's not in the same way that twos and threes do, right? So like deep down, they want to be perceived a certain way because they don't want to be seen as weak, right? And they put on this strong exterior so that they're perceived as strong, but that strong exterior is often kind of protecting a highly vulnerable interior that they don't want to present to other people.
I very much agree with that. I very much agree with that. Okay, Ashton. So to bring this all, and I mean, I usually don't ask my guests this, but I feel like you are a very good person to ask. If you wanted to tell the listening audience anything about an Enneagram that you just feel like is the hill that you will die on, the thing that you want everyone to know, what would that be for you?
The hill that I would die on when it comes to the Enneagram is really to just have an open mind about it and to use it as a tool. Like, don't use it as a band-aid for like, oh, this is just who I am. I'm taking this information, kind of goes along with what I said about tests earlier.
Mhm.
Like, don't just take that information and be done with it. Use it as a tool to transform your life and your relationships and your business and your clients and all of those things, because when we understand ourselves and when we understand other people, we do better work.
Ashton, this has been an amazing conversation for first thing in the morning. I feel like I want everyone to come follow you because you do amazing content around the Enneagram.
Thank you.
But where is the best place for people to find out more information about you and your Enneagram services?
Yes, please check out my Instagram, Enneagram Ashton, like Coley said at the beginning, and my website, enneagramashton.com. I specialize working with teams and workplaces in order to transform their relationships. And I help train other people on how they can use the Enneagram with their clients as well.
Yes, which is what brought me to this rabbit hole to start. Ashton, I cannot thank you enough for joining me for this conversation. I mean, I feel like we only touched the surface. So I feel like I should just have you back and we should like focus on something really specific next time. Yeah. I have a problem, Ashton. Once I invite somebody on once, I just keep on inviting them
I'm
back.
happy to come back. I will be here.
All right, everyone. I hope that you have felt a little inspired by today's conversation. And guess what? If you don't actually know your Enneagram type, you should go take the test as a first step. And then you should explore it more. All right. That's it for this episode. See you next time.